All right, so now it's your turn. Those of you on the balcony, if you have a question, if you come to the front, we'll hear you well, and you can experience yourself being a Shakespearean actor of some kind and speaking from the balcony. Anyone else, just stand up and speak in a public voice. And I think in this room, oh, we do have a microphone down here. Oh, we have one up there too. Oh, we're really well organised. But anyway, don't miss the opportunity to be somewhat Shakespearean. Come to the forward and sing a bit of an aria or something and answer your question. Do you have, are you ready? Yeah, for a question? Okay, here's if you just give your name and you know, the department or organisation you represent, and then fire away.
Chris Orman, Premier and Cabinet. Also Government Services Group. I bang on about some things all the time, but I'm going to bang on about one now. The RA ad that people see on TV, there's a bath of water. The father gets out and the son is about to get in, looks a bit dirty, pulls a funny face. Everyone's a bit, you know, you laugh at it. The fact is that our awards have that, or our employment conditions have that you can share a bath 4 times in it. It's still in our awards. What are you going to do about removing these artefacts of the 20th century so that we can have a modern and flexible public sector?
All right, thank you, Chris. Dan?
I'll feel that.
Well, it's actually a really tough one to answer, Chris, because in fact it was, and I think you know my personal views, I agree with you. I think a lot of the conditions are quite archaic. However, I think we need to also, given Peter Christopher's here, I just need to be careful that we also embed that in, I guess, in the enterprise bargaining process, but I think not a lot of it is there. I think we need to start talking about how we do modernise those conditions, consult with people, and make it consistent across government. So I don't have a single bullet or a silver bullet around it. I think we need to tackle sort of the list of issues, and there's lots of them, one by one, and start to reform, I guess, conditions that where do I start? Classification system, perhaps, it's phenomenal. So I don't have an answer in terms of what am I going to do tomorrow about it, but I do know that we need to actually work together to make some significant shifts, bearing in mind I don't want to erode conditions that people are actually familiar with, and I want to have some consistency. So I think the best thing that I can say is we need to standardise what's best in the public sector and find best in class and actually start to use some of those examples. It's a very strong leadership challenge too. Often it's the implementation of those conditions of employment at the local level and the interpretation of those. So for my HR colleagues that are in here, I think we do it differently in many different agencies. It's about making sure that we apply it consistently and professionally.
All right.
Don't ask me that.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, please. The gentleman here, there's a microphone just coming down the aisle.
Thank you. I'm Bronte Cope. I used to manage the 90-day change projects with this fantastic team of excellent people. I'm now in DIPTI. We've got a brand new chief executive, Michael Deegan, who has made it very clear that he sees the values as everybody's business, and I think that's an absolutely spot-on aspiration. My concern is that between the aspiration and the reality there's a gap. I'm interested to just throw out there the challenge of how does the Office for the Public Sector work to find ways to embed those values within organisations other than just leaving it up to the organisations to do. It's really quite difficult to get people to demonstrate the values, and I'm reminded of the comment that Raymond made about having to separate his 2IC back in his company because the values were not being demonstrated. I think that's a really hard challenge to tackle. Yeah.
Well, in fact, I think I'll start at a high level, and I think Dan might want to say something. I think the answer is in what you said at the end, and that is people need to be made accountable. So we need to have some very robust performance agreement or performance measurement, targets that are set, but not just the technical targets, but also people that are actually modelling those values and behaviours. So we articulate them and hold people accountable. One of the things I have to say is the Premier has done that through the collective Senior Management Council. So not only has he talked about fiscal responsibility, he has talked about 90-day projects and actually the embedding of the values and behaviours, but we haven't gone far enough because we need to talk specifically about the sorts of behaviours we will uphold for chief executives, starting with the most senior people and working all the way down. Dan might want to make a comment about tools or performance measurement tools like the high performance framework. I think we need to get serious about targets, measurements and holding people accountable.
Yeah, is this on? Yeah. Yeah, certainly we do have a couple of tools that are at work in the Office for the Public Sector, and the High Performance Framework is one. It certainly is a values-based tool, and it does reference the public sector values and encourage managers and directors to have a consistent discussion with their team that is values-based on an ongoing basis. We also have the discussion guide, which is available on the website. For me, the trick here is striking a balance between whole-of-sector approaches to these things and respecting the necessary autonomy of organisations. I'd personally like to see, and this is a personal opinion, it's not reflective necessarily of the program, I'd personally like to see Senior Management Council take a more visible and transparent approach to the public sector values and certainly providing that very clear leadership, values-based leadership for the whole public sector, as well as acting as independent chief executives of organisations. And I think, frankly, until that leadership is very clearly provided, then I think the public sector will continue to struggle to find that consistent, if you like, articulation of the values and behaviours. And we absolutely need that.
You'll probably be interested to know that the Premier and I are visiting Senior Management Council in a couple of weeks with that very subject.
Oh, good.
So I don't know how many in the room. I mean, this is not a name and shame thing. I'm just really, this is for my edification and maybe your own. How many in the room do know the 8 values? Okay. How many in the room who don't know them know where to find them? Okay, that's the start. How many in the room know where to find the selected behaviours that have been identified as critical at this moment to embodying those values? So there's a beginning point. I think we can do a much better job of just pushing them out. In our company, when you came into the office and turned your computer on, that's what showed up. And you couldn't get off them for a minute. Then you could, right? Every day, that's what showed up. A value and the sets of three individual behaviours, and a little question. What are you going to do today? Do something or other. It's just got to be out there. Posters on the walls. Because I think it's perfectly appropriate for different agencies to focus on different behaviours.
Yeah.
It's not appropriate for different agencies to focus on different values. We need consistent, but within one agency, then maybe you need a greater emphasis, say around I don't know, learning and development, and commitment to learning and development. Another agency, it may be around communication process. So that's quite appropriate, and agency leaders can work on. My bet is that probably 80% of them would be common across the whole public sector, and there might be minor little, changes that you'd focus on in individual agencies. But people have got to know, all 100,000 people have got to have this stuff sitting up, jumping at them every day, barking at them, All right, someone else, sir.
Thank you, Raymond.
Then we're going to head off to this side or upstairs. Hey, you don't need it.
I don't need it, right.
No.
But I'm mayor of the town of Gawler, and one of the things that I'd like to ask of the challenge, and I congratulate Emma on your new role, is that from Clarendon to Playford, it's the city square. Outside of that, you get the heartland of South Australia, which is Gawler, Barossa Valley and Clare Valley. And then you've got the outback. I'm involved with tourism, also as being a mayor, because I love the outback of beautiful South Australia. 2 weeks ago I was up there, and we went around the area, and there's got to be changes made in the way the national parks and conservation parks are actually managed in this state. Most of them are operated in the northern area out of Port Augusta, and when you go to the actual national parks yourself, you're very lucky if you can find a ranger or somebody to talk to promote that beautiful area. There has to be some changes. I ask if you can look into the point. There is fantastic tourism opportunities for young people to go into those areas of work. 2 weeks ago, the Sturt Desert Peas and all that were coming out. Since then, there's been more rain. It's going to be the best tourism season for a long time. Please, can we all look outside the square?
I think you raise a perfect point about collaboration across the sectors as well. So, look, if we're challenged to collaborate within the public sector, and I'm doing some joint projects with people that are in this room that come from local government, there is so much potential if we actually all work together, in particular state and local government, because you're at the heart of where the people are basically, and we're developing policies and serving those people. So I totally agree with you. My only comment, I guess, about the national parks is that with the announcement, Alan announcing, we're looking for the Chief Executive, it might be the first thing I talk to the Chief Executive about when they arrive.
All right, so please, over here, the lady in the front, and then there's someone up there next? Yeah, okay. Sorry, I didn't spot you. We'll have you right after this.
Hi, I'm Judith Clavens from Mental Health and Substance Abuse SA Health. I just have a quick question. I guess you've been looking out into the international sphere to find best practice in public service. Have you got some examples that you could put forward that we can look at for a benchmark?
It's a good point, and we have actually sourced many good examples. Not a lot of people are the size of South Australia, not a lot of countries, although certainly when I worked in Diminish, Joran Roos did bring to my attention places in Spain. I'm going to Taipei, believe it or not, to talk about their creative cities agenda, and they are actually talking about creative bureaucracy. So one thing I've realised here is that we're not kind of unique and that we've got to do it differently here. The world, it's global. And Dan mentioned that there are the same challenges facing sort of cities around the world, and it just so happens that Helsinki, Spain, Balboa in Spain and Taipei has a lot in common with South Australia. So the four of us are actually talking about it. The eastern states are interested in what we're doing because they can't get the traction because they're so much bigger. But there's something about the innovation happening at the edges here. But the best examples, I would say, is the UK. They've actually done a lot of transforming of their digital by default, and also the way that they've sort of structured reform programs. So the thing I think that the office should do, if we haven't already, is actually have those things uploaded on our website. So in fact people can go and actually find what is happening across the world. I have a team of people in my office, and people outside, by the way, people like you, that send us stuff and say, have you seen this? And I try and keep up with the tweets around some of that as well. So we've got to keep looking, but it's a collective look.
There's some very innovative programs in New Zealand as well that are quite pertinent here. So I can't remember what it's called now, we changed the name of it. What was called the Jobs Acceleration Fund, that got a new name 30 seconds before it was announced. And a lot of that came from work's being done in New Zealand and in the UK. So I think the inference in your question, I think it was an inference, is I think a very valid one. We don't have to invent everything. No. We can look at, you know, I like the phrase sharing approaches that work. It's a much lower risk strategy. And there are many approaches out there that do work. You can't just pick them up and dump them here. You've got to obviously massage them and play with them a bit and so on. But I think the 80-20 rule works well. 80% of it will work, and you work on the 20% to get it adapted.
And so, Raymond, can I also say about that? Actually, some of the best practices happening here in South Australia. Some of our colleagues at Adelaide University have been called over to Vietnam to deal with the issue of information silos in Vietnam, and teaching in Singapore as well. I think, you know, it's absolutely essential to look overseas and look what's happening in areas like Copenhagen and some parts of the US. It's even just as useful to look at where the problems are occurring organisationally, and it's not just the public sector. General Motors have just done they had a financial year recently where they recalled more cars than they sold, which is a pretty significant problem. So they did a review into what the main issue, what the issues were, and the critical issue was a culture of information silos. And now they've undertaken a body of work to try and deal with that. So it's interesting to see not just best practice, but where the real problems and how they're being tackled.
Okay, up the balcony.
Yes, I'm Anne Bosio from State Development Department. I'm interested, across the public service, we've had a number of high-performing perception surveys. And I have some issues around the technicalities of them, but I think the thing is that what do we do with them? You know, it was that chief executive was supposed to have discussions and directors were supposed to have discussions around, you know, the findings. But I don't know that that's actually really happened. And I guess we have a lot of evidence. We collect a lot of information about just how the culture is in an organisation. But what are we really doing with what we're collecting?
Well, currently the strategy for the high performance framework, which is the basis for the staff surveys, is it really is in the hands of the chief executive, as you've rightly said, to implement improvement processes. Now that is happening. DPC, as an example, has 9 improvement projects that are underway, and we've had some involvement with that. When the high performance framework was originally designed, it was for a governance system that no longer exists, which is partly why we're revising that. We've also, so the level of autonomy, and I don't want to suggest in any way that it's been buried, that's not the case. Nearly every chief executive we've worked with actually does take it seriously and wants to see some improvements on the back of it. But how able are they to implement that, which is one reason we'd like to see change programs resourced within agencies. It's not major resources, but properly resourced in agencies so that when those improvement projects come up, they can be properly implemented. In terms of, we do make comparisons across the public sector, and John has data available to give some indication of where organisations are performing well in comparison to one another. But there's certainly, I think, a lot of work to be done to raise transparency around that.
I think it also reflects back then on subsequent participation rates in it as well. If you don't actually do anything with the first round of information, then why should people go and fill in the next survey?
Even more serious, I guess, and is the fact that there is some evidence or things that those surveys tell you that is quite critical for the organisation to actually address.
Yeah.
And I can take Demata as an example. We had a team of people, and my role, that responded to, I guess, things that were particularly an issue, where people didn't feel they had feedback. There was a wellbeing issue. There's a whole lot of things, and I think that tells you the health of the organisation. We actually need to not only look at that information collectively. It needs to be information that actually is fed into a chief executive performance agreement without just saying, have you done it? But more importantly, what have we got out of this and how are you addressing this? And they would say that they would like that. They would like to be held accountable for that. Dan's right. There aren't resources, and quite frankly, you don't have a change team that does the change for you. It's the adaptive leadership challenge. It's the problem of every leader in that organisation, every individual to make a difference. And that plan is the first thing that they've got when they're talking about their performance. So there's a lot to be done in that area, and we need to take it seriously.
Thank you. Thank you. Peter Christopher, PSA. How do you reconcile the situation where one of the key values is looking after people and the corporate knowledge that government has, and then on the other hand, government-imposed limitations that result in agencies pretty randomly getting rid of people at all levels, including park rangers, right through the board, where it actually needs people for the future, and people who, while they're working, are valued, all of a sudden get a package or a contract not extended or something happens, and that value is lost to the public sector, and their colleagues also see that somebody who was valued is gone. I'd just be interested in your views about how you reconcile that whole process.
Oh, that's a hard one to answer, Peter. But look, I'll give you the answer, I guess, from my sort of organisational kind of culture change perspective. One is that if agencies are really clear about what their strategic directions are and what they're funded for, so we're in a tight fiscal environment, and we're all clear about the sort of things that we're going to do and what we will stop doing and the sort of capabilities that we actually need, then there is, and people within the organisation have some buy-in, we can collectively then work out, do we want to have national parks, and if we do, who's going to look after them? And we need national parks, so that's a priority for this agency. What I don't think we do well, some agencies do it better than others, is actually tackle that sort of strategic issue, then do whatever realignment's required, and most importantly, and I have to confess, I probably didn't do it in my current round of reviews, is actually what capability do I have within that organisation that I will need for the future? What we're doing is we're a tight fiscal environment, need to make some savings, you and you, in fact, it's often maybe those middle, lower level type roles, and executives are getting a bit of a hammering now, so it's all of those as well, rather than saying, what are the capabilities we need for the future? And then work backwards. And then maybe we'll have a more hooked up approach in terms of what government wants to be in the business of and what it doesn't want to be. Because we can't do everything, and we can't do everything that we've done to date. Something's got to stop. So that would be my response to that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you know, in a period of change, I'm just filling while you get the microphone. In a period of change, there always has to be, organizational transformation, right? And every organization gets out of kilter a bit, and having a process for constant renewal is a really healthy thing, so that it just becomes an expected part of the process.
Okay, Jessica Boney, and I have the privilege to work in the 90-day change projects, and also the extraordinary privilege of meeting some outstanding, passionate, talented, professional public servants. Across our projects, some of the things that have hit me is that people are clear on what the issues are, they're clear about what the opportunities are, but the underlying theme that I reflect that's coming through is fear. Fear of failure, fear of politics, fear of appraisal, fear of not being accepted, fear of challenging past practice. So how do we, and I think the answer lies a bit in the values, but how do we create the conditions that empower people and diminish the fear?
The only thing it's a really big question. I mean, I can go back and give you the kind of the leadership answer to that. And every leader at every level needs to make sure that they provide the opportunity for people to kind of innovate. I only take it from my personal experience. I was actually really scared when Raymond asked me to do and support this program, and I wanted to remain in my organisation, Demita, because it was safe, and fear of what my colleagues would actually think in Senior Management Council about this soft kind of reform type program. The only thing I'd actually say is there are a lot of leaders out there that don't fear, that do want to take a risk, and often someone who actually has a will find a way. And I think that's my only message there, is we have people like you, Jess, that sit there and actually say, we'll make this happen, or you'll call me in and I'll go and fix it. So in fact, I can actually say now we have an office. If there's something that needs to happen, you believe it's a reform agenda, then we need to talk to each other, and then we will push through.
But I do think, Jess, you answered your own question. If we believe
that's right,
that something that is important in the public sector is courage and tenacity, we need to reward people who are courageous and tenacious and support them when they fail. Because by definition, if you are courageous and tenacious, you will occasionally fail. And we want people to fail. We don't want people failing at the same thing 3 times in a row. That's not courageous and tenacity, that's stupidity. But we want people to try things, get out of their comfort zones, push into new frontiers. And as leadership, well, the behaviours, we want individuals to understand that. We want individuals to understand the behaviour of the organisation when that happens. You turn that failure into a learning experience that not only the individual learns, but the whole entity learns. And frankly, the taboo is timidity. Doing the same stupid thing over and over again because it's in the rule book, when we know it's irrelevant and not working. So if we have to, so that's why these behaviours are absolutely critical, and that's why they're not abstract behaviours. That's why it takes days and months of work on this, is because they are the behaviours that are the catalytic behaviours that enforce the values that we want people to, understand and be given permission to do. I saw a hand movement somewhere. There it is. And I think this should be the last question, because I know I got carried away and it's now 11:20 and that's against my religion to end meetings late. But, anyway.
Thank you, Ray. My name's Steve Vines. I work in the ministerial office with the Minister, and I've got two things I'd like to say. The first is that this is a tremendous opportunity for public servants, it would seem to me, given that you have a Minister who has spent time as a public servant, was recently the Parliamentary Secretary for the Public Service. She's invested in this process and is enormously supportive of what this process can bring. So there's high-level support and high-level anticipation about what this can deliver. That's the big message. The other message I have is that I work as the advisor in the public sector, which is a bit odd because I don't have a public sector background. I come from the private sector, but the naive observer effect leads me to suggest that I see on a regular basis this silo mentality that we've spoken about, Dan and Irma, where, for example, you're someone sitting at a Service SA front counter and you're dealing with the registrar's requirements on a daily basis. You don't work for the registrar, you work for Chris Irman over here, but you've got to do whatever the registrar wants you to do, and there's a potential for this disconnect between what one silo wants you to do and what another silo expects you to do, and there are difficulties associated with that. I think everyone, right down to the level of someone sitting at a Service SA counter, should have the courage to be able to make contact with Dan and Irma, or even myself through my excellent colleague Amber Hardy, who actually does all the work in the office, and start that process of challenging what we do. So.
Thanks, Steve. Good. I hadn't realised there was anybody from the Minister's office here, because I was going to ask you a question. I was hoping she'd be here when I asked this, you see. So I'm going to take 30 seconds to ask Irma a very simple question. So let's imagine all this stuff is working in the public sector, right? So let's live the future now. It's not impossible, right? If we don't live it, it won't happen. So it's all working. We got these values. We're tenacious, can-do, customer-focused. Stuff is really happening in South Australia. We are the strategic differentiation. So Irma, how do the public servants who are living these values influence the politicians to actually take some of the tough decisions and see them through?
Do you know, if all of that was actually happening, the politicians wouldn't have to be preempting you would be preempting what they actually need. You would be one step ahead and basically finding the solution. You'd know your citizens. They wouldn't be complaining to the politicians because they had bad service, or when they went to get a birth certificate or whatever, it's just fabulous service. You were preempting what that politician needs. We actually have the answers. We should be serving them because they serve their citizens. That's what I would say.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to the Honourable Susan Close. If you can pass along my 15-minute thank you speech to her, please. And Dan, thank you for your frankness. In lieu of an extremely large speaker's gift to anybody, the IPPA is going to make a donation to the Minister's charity of choice, which is the Smith family. So on behalf of the Smith family, I thank you for your generosity. Thanks to IPPA for putting this on. There will be an online forum seeking your feedback, online form seeking your feedback on today's meeting, so feel free to use it. And also online, you will note that the next big IPPA event is the Dunstan Oration on October the 8th. Do they know who's doing it? I mean, I do, but is it both yet? Okay, so Greg Conte is doing that. I'm sure he'll be flogging his book at the same time. I'll tell him to bring extras. But, thank you for being here today. And I guess my parting word would be, every night when you go home, just ask yourself one simple little question. how can I add more value tomorrow in something that I did today? It's all about adding value. If we're going to be successful in this state, in this economy, we have to all add value. And it starts at home, so to speak. So thank you.
Thank you, Rami.